Hey, and welcome back to another episode. What if the real AI revolution is not about replacing people, but helping people become more capable, more productive, and more valuable at work? And what if leaders who thrive in the next era are not the ones chasing a new tool, but the ones learning how to adopt AI wisely and lead through change? Joining me today is Kate Marshall, the founder of the GRAI, Fractional Chief AI Officer and author of AI at Work. It helps leaders and organizations move beyond the hype of artificial intelligence and into the practical, responsible adoption that drives real results. With a background spanning cybersecurity, workforce enablement, and AI strategy, she brings a grounded perspective on how leaders can embrace innovation without losing the human element. Today, we're talking about AI literacy, responsible adoption, and what it takes to lead in a world being reshaped by intelligent technology. So, Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we just heard your incredible intro and bio, but in your own words, just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I come from the cybersecurity training industry. That is a lot of my background and my baseline. So any sort of AI adoption, implementation that I do with people is with that security and governance framework in mind. And now what I do is work closely with human resources departments. I work closely with executives, small businesses, all helping them walk through the mess that is AI adoption and implementation. And then I train non-technical professionals on how to actually use these tools.
When we're talking about AI and we're talking about implementing them with strategy, what do you currently see in the workplace and with the folks that you work with? Do they have a strategy? Or are they just like, you know what, I'm just grabbing onto AI and I'm going to make it work?
Yeah, no. So what I am seeing is so many organizations are still stuck in that experimental phase and wanting to be able to level up, wanting to bring agents and automations into the space, but they're either working with legacy systems or they are dealing with the human side of it where there's still fear around adopting these tools. There's fear around, am I just training an AI agent to replace me? And so there's a lot of experimenting going on, a lot of piloting projects. But what I am seeing is still 70 to 80% of the projects that are being piloted are not coming to completion full scale in organizations. And it's a data problem. It's a people problem. It's a legacy system problem. And it is a problem. For sure.
Well, let's talk about the people side of that first.
Yeah.
Why do people still feel like or fear that AI is going to replace them?
I think the narrative is doing a really great job at telling us that. So every week, a new organization is coming out saying that they are massively, reducing their workforce. And then what happens? Their stock prices shoot up and, their investors become really happy with that. The narrative that I am seeing is more about we're going to bring in AI and we're going to reduce costs. And what that conversation really needs to be is, hey, we're bringing in AI. We are going to supplement your workload. We're going to, take all of the redundant tasks off of your plate. And with that free time you have, we're then going to develop exponential growth. And that is what more companies should be saying, what the conversation should be. But instead, it's this fear of we're going to bring these tools in and we're going to condense things. We're going to collapse things. Movies aren't helping. The narrative that you see on the news isn't helping. But I believe that AI is going to bring us massive abundance. And I just wish that there was better transparency on why organizations are bringing it in and what they're actually going to do with it and what their goals are. And their goals should not be, I am just going to reduce the workforce or cut costs.
When we're looking at the AI and the human perspective and reducing cost, I don't believe AI is there yet to really fully, replace humans. I deal with it all the time when I call somewhere and they have like this AI person answer the phone and like there's this fake keyboard type rating. It's incredibly frustrating to deal with. And I don't think businesses are there to like really replace people. So as we look at the collaborative method of how do we bring AI on board as like an additional person that works with us, what are you seeing the best businesses adopting in that type of perspective?
Great question. What I see is developing that exoskeleton type of mentality. So this is where you have your human orchestrators that are guiding the AI agents. They're giving them the tasks. They're developing automations that, are redundant, that you don't need human brain power to do. But then that human orchestrator is taking a look at the output and testing judgment, making sure that things make sense and actually driving the goals forward. I completely agree with you. I do not fully trust AI to execute on anything. I very much keep human in the loop. I see it getting better and better, but I see a few opportunities for these unicorn style organizations to come in where it's one CEO that has a bunch of AI agents, doing beautiful work at companies, but you still need that human to direct the majority of that. And I don't see that going away anytime soon. I see orchestrators that are humans communicating with different agents, different automations, and that's really where you get the power of the AI plus human work.
What's the best way for an organization? Let's say they're not using AI, and I think a lot of people are bringing AI on. You just said like 70% aren't even coming to fruition in finishing projects. How do we successfully onboard AI as a strategy?
Yeah, that is a huge question. I think the biggest fail point that I'm seeing is organizations will bring in their tools, they will update their AI policy, maybe put an approved tools list, and then they'll say that box is checked. And then, go head down and wonder 3 months later why it's not working. What really needs to happen is bringing in the tools and then empowering the people to actually learn them. What I like to say is that we are giving people keys to this fancy car, but we're not teaching anybody how to drive. And so when you are bringing these tools into the space, you also need to make sure that your teams actually know how to use it, know what to do with it, know the guardrails. You need to connect the legacy systems. And then one of the other bigger challenges I see is your data hygiene, and cleaning up your data and making sure that it is in a cohesive place that can actually be helpful. And so when I'm working with companies, I am helping them define which large language model to bring in, if they want to live in the Google Gemini ecosystem or your Claude, which is having a huge moment right now, or ChatGPT, and then bring it in, train it on your people, your business, everything that you're working through, and then training the people on how to actually orchestrate and interact with it and get the most out of it.
I want to talk about data integrity real quick. So a lot of folks are not migrating to AI because they're afraid of where their data resides, who has access to it, and do my competitors have access to my information? Because the AI company has got to learn itself. And so how do we help people come to terms with where the data is and how that is maintained and controlled?
Yeah. Let me just start by saying that this is one of those problems that every organization is facing as well. When it comes to data hygiene, when it comes to data security, the one thing that I will always recommend is whatever you do, don't you dare just put your stuff into the free plan. At this point, everybody needs to be functioning either on that $20 a month, large language model plan or above, because otherwise you're guaranteed that they're training on your data. And there are different systems that you can use for different priorities, or, it's going to be a different conversation whether you're healthcare, you've got HIPAA, or if you're, a financial institution and you've got a lot of PII that, will be living in the cloud, but you don't want it touching, your standard large language models. And so it really varies for all, but I would say everybody needs to get on a paid version of a plan, enterprise and teams plans for organizations for sure. And then you have to be really thoughtful about what you're ingesting and what you're feeding in to these different tools. And one of the things that I am seeing a lot of, there are voice dictation tools that are really popular. I use Whisper Flow. I cannot live without it at this point, but people don't understand that even that is, it has a lot of personal information that is then going up to a cloud. And so for enterprises, if you're turning on these tools, you have to be really thoughtful about what data is getting ingested, where it's going. And you hear the horror stories of people using their ChatGPT for a therapist. And I would never recommend that either. That's where I would go to download one of those private, LLMs, put it on your server. And so it's not, going up into the cloud. And so there it is really meticulous on how you think through where the data goes. It's also based on, all the features of, do we care about SOC 2 compliance if you're in an enterprise environment, or if you're just using it for yourself? Either way, get off of the free plan.
You mentioned a great point about, the SOC 2 compliance. And I think about hospitals that are using it. There's HIPAA issues, there's PII issues. When we set up a governance for that and we're integrating it as a strategy, what do we see are the biggest issues that people just aren't thinking about or organizations are just overlooking?
I think it's all of the tools that are being connected. So you could have beautiful governance and you could have beautiful guardrails built around some of the larger tools. But if you don't have policies and approved tools lists on all of the other connecting features, like meeting notes is a massive one. So what are your teams using for their meeting notes? And what are you doing for recording devices? And we're seeing this now quite a bit more as the Meta glasses and the wearables and the Plod connectors that record everything. There's a massive amount of data on there. And what is your policy on that as an organization? And especially if you're deep embedded in healthcare, finance, all of the big players.
When we work with those companies and we're going to reach out, is that something that we can negotiate in a plan of like, hey, I want my data firewalled off. I want to have a separate enclave for my data? Or are we just allowed to be like, well, you just get what you get and that's it? Do you see any negotiation taking place?
I actually don't see negotiations on that. I see boundaries and I see guardrails and I see here's where the information can go up into the cloud. This information has to stay on our private servers. But I think that's really dependent on what regulations you have to stick with. Also, insurance. And so when you see a cyber AI insurance popping up and telling you the things that it will and won't cover inside of a policy, all of these things are starting to dictate where our data can live, where it should live. And it's really a customized problem, which I think is another major issue right now, is these systems and adoption policies. They're very customized based on the tech stack, the industry you're in, and it makes it a mess to try to be really helpful because there's no one size fits all kind of a customized box.
I don't want leaders listening to this to get discouraged by the conversation we're having about data integrity and where it lies and everything else. I know people can figure that out. I just want people thinking in that process of where does your data go, who keeps it, and where is the integrity on it. But for folks that are like, hey, I'm using a LLM somewhere, I get it right out of the box. Well, now my problem is I sound like everybody else.
Yeah.
How do we fix that problem?
Yeah, such a great point. But if I could just land that last one, because when you're talking about risk mitigation and risk assessment, this is where I really struggle with leadership as well, too, because, there was a saying in cybersecurity is like the most secure system is a laptop that is turned off and at the bottom of the ocean. But that does not help anybody, And so you have to balance between, okay, risks are we willing to take to be able to exponentially grow, to be able to leverage the data and, the predictive technologies that could really help the business thrive. And how do we manage that risk? How do we take acceptable risks? And so I'm with you. I am very forward leaning when it comes to AI usage and AI tools. And I do not think it will help leaders to just step back and say, nope, we're not going to do anything because we don't feel comfortable with it. I think you have got to lean forward. You have got to accept risk in a smart way, build guardrails around it, but you have to move and innovate and try these new tools for sure. But to your other question on training, yeah, that is one of the biggest hurdles and complaints that I hear is when you are just starting to use your LLM, call it Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, whichever one's your favorite. When you are first starting to use it, this is where you hear people say, it's not that great, or it's not really working for me. It doesn't sound good. It's AI slop. And almost certainly what that means is you haven't trained it and customized it to you. So you need to tell it all of the things that are important to you and train it on who you are, train it on what you care about, the kind of work that you're in. the projects that you have. And it may sound daunting, but it's not. It's literally as easy as turning on voice mode and sitting with your favorite beverage and just word dumping, and putting in your website and showing example emails, or, if you have sales slicks and flyers and PDFs that you use, and just giving it a sense of who you are. And then tools like Claude have a really great set of skill sets and branding skills that way you can really hone in and get a much better output. And so it doesn't even look and feel like you're using a large language model once you have it trained really well in your tone of voice and your style guides, all of that. Just takes a little work.
Right. And I'm just thinking about a recent training I had to sit through because our organization finally allowed us to use an LLM for some of the work we do. And because of the sensitivity and nature, we can't use it for a while. And they started explaining, well, this is how you ask a question and this is how you do this. And you have everyone at varying levels of understanding of AI. So if an organization is going to train people on AI, what do you think the best way to go about that training is?
I would run a couple of different sessions and let people come in and develop their baseline from depending on the session. So you have the brand new users that they need to understand how you can attach files. They need to understand how you can ingest the information, what projects are, and why you would use a project versus building a custom GPT. So I usually start with a workshop or two of, hey, here's your LLM, and here are all of the features within it. Here are all of the connectors tools. Here are all of the ways that you can build it out. And then, once you've hit that baseline, then we go into, okay, here's how you can start to leverage agents and sub-agents and build out automations and schedule tasks, and then have it really streamline and work and interact with your documents. But starting at baseline 0, I think everybody has to, at this point. And it's just a matter of coming in whenever you introduce a new tool, actually providing training and time and space for people to learn them. And I interact with Slack quite a bit. And when I am talking to clients and they'll say, well, we need to build this agent, we need to do this, and we wanted to do this. And they have tools like Slack available, but they don't understand the features that are already embedded in them. You could just say, that's actually just a Slack bot. And all we have to do is connect these two pieces and it's going to do exactly what you want to do. But because we're not training and we're not continuing to train people on the platforms and how they evolve, we just don't know, and we'll use them 10, 15% of the capacity that we can. So I think to rule out and really scope out your question, I think the biggest challenge is we, again, are giving tools to people and we are not showing them how to manage them, how to build with them and how to use them. And so how can organizations create that time and space to give back and let their people really understand the tools that they've already been given and then build in, some of these new ones from there, though. But I love the University of YouTube. At this point, you can pretty much look at it, find any kind of training at YouTube. It's just the time dedicated to do it.
You bring up a great point about making sure that everyone's given the time and space to train it. You also brought up a point earlier about human in the loop. And I want to tie that back to what we're currently talking about now, because you're also talking about automation. And I don't want people to get confused about terms. Can you define what human in the loop is and what human out of the loop is?
Yeah, absolutely. When you have any sort of automation, and actually I'll step back, automations and agents also confuse people. So when I am talking about automation, I give a comparison like trains on a track. With an automation, you have a goal, you have connectors in between, and you are going on that straight line track to get to that goal. If anything breaks, if anything stops, it completely stops that automation. With a AI agent is like a car on the road. So you have the goal, you have the destination, but if there's traffic or something's broken or if there's a new idea, you're able to pivot around and move around, and the agent will loop through thinking and executing and then understanding, identifying, thinking, executing, and just going through those different loops to be able to get to that. So that is automations versus AI agents. But when we're talking about humans in the loop versus humans completely out of the loop, when you are building either one of those, you want to have a human checkpoint or 2 or 5, depending on how big the system is. But all that essentially means is you have a physical human looking at what's happening, offering judgment on if this is the right way, if this is the right connector, and then, checking the box and saying, go forth, versus fully autonomous, do not have human in the loop, and they just execute. And this is where you see agents going rogue. And this is where you see a lot of AI slop that comes through where if a human had looked at it at stage 2, it would have said, oh, no, we're actually going in the wrong direction. We need to pivot and go this way. Where if there's no human judgment on that, then you don't get that. So keeping humans orchestrating and involved in your automations and your agents, I think still at this point is completely vital.
When an organization is looking at developing AI, what lens can we take a look at it and go, well, this is how I'm going to evaluate which tool is best for our organization?
You always want to start with the goal and not the tool. It is what I say is that you have to look at, okay, what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to build? And then work backwards from there of, okay, what tools actually fit this? And then you go through the normal scoping where it's, okay, what resources do we have? Budgeting constraints and just all of those things that, is our data ready? How can we bring in these types of tools? But it always starts with the use case. And I will say that for both the people side and for organization side is where do you want to go? What do you want these automations and these tools to do? And then work backwards on, do you have the components? Do you have the pieces to actually build that out? And what do you need? And what's the art of the possible at this point?
I love how you say start with the goal, not the tool, because that's incredibly important. So thank you for sharing that. And the show is about practicality. And so you wrote a book, AI at Work, correct? And I was reading through it. I love how practical it is, especially when you were talking about, hey, this is how you can use AI to create an SOP. And you kind of go in through there. So could you just take a couple of minutes to explain your approach to writing AI at Work?
Sure. I started off just doing checklists for my clients. And I would find that no matter if they were a small business, if they focused on sales versus management, whatever, that they all really needed a certain set of steps and checklists. And so this came from a need of my clients all needing very similar things. So when you are starting at baseline 0 and are just wanting to implement AI, there are certain things that you should do, certain things that you could do that will really make significant difference. And so when I wrote it's really more of a workbook style that this is not a sit down and read like a novel. This is you need to have this in front of you with your computer. You're working together on it. But it is a guidebook of sorts for non-technical professionals that don't even know where to start. And so it will go through sections of, okay, have you chosen which tools you want to use? And if yes, great, check that box and move on. Or if not, let's go backwards and see, okay, what systems do you have in place already? What tools do you have access to? What enterprise platform are you approved on? And that's a really big one right now is for a lot of organizations, they mandate, you're using our enterprise platform or you're using Copilot. And so you have to work with the tools that you're given and then go from there. But email and chat automations and meeting automations and building out SOPs, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that is once you semi-automate that and once you clean it up, that's where you can see massive productivity growth, exponential growth, and it's all very regimented and customizable based on who you are, where you're at, but it's still similar checkbox items for no matter who you are. And that's really where that came from, is just a start here kind of a guide when you are, trying to even bring AI into either your personal life or your work life.
That was the biggest thing that stood out to your book for me, because you're right. It's not something you read cover to cover. And I was looking at it, I was like, man, this is incredibly practical. And I was like, I know several folks that I'm going to share it with. We're going to put the links in the description of this episode so everyone can reach to it and get all the information that you have to offer as well. So is there anything that we didn't talk about or a question that I didn't ask you that you were like, you know what, I really wish you would ask this thing, or we talked about this one topic?
I think just the conversation about where we're going with AI agents and automations and how a lot of organizations are not really prepared for what's coming. Because we don't all know at this point, but as we start to bring in AI agents into the workforce, how does that layer work on top of our existing employees? And how can you prepare your employees for implementation of AI agents and bringing them in? So do your people need help cleaning up their own data? Do your people need training? Do they need a different ecosystem to support bringing agents into the space? I mean, when you think through how the org charts function normally versus how they are going to function 3 or 4 years from now, I don't know that anybody's prepared for this at this point. And it's going to be wild, and it's going to be weird, and it'll be really exciting to see. But really just starting to think through, okay, what do we think the world is going to look like in 4 or 5 years? And then backtrack, what are the things that we need to start really focusing on to be able to manage through it and support the people through it?
I was thinking about it. I'm not quite sure if organizations actually have like a future of work or an AI department where they manage what the force structure and what the impact of the force structure is going to be in the future. And, as you were sharing that, I was thinking about that. I was like, I wonder if those positions exist in organizations today.
Ish. So I'm a fractional chief AI officer, and there's a lot of us out there starting to do this work for organizations where we are teamed up with human resources, we're teamed up with the executive team and their IT departments, because you need all three of those as stakeholders to really affect change. But as a whole, I'm just seeing us all trying to evolve and trying to understand what's happening in the space. And I don't have a great example to point to of somebody who's doing it phenomenally well and is, widely ahead of the curve at this point.
I really appreciate your perspectives and your points. For everyone watching this, go to the descriptions again. You're going to find Kate's information into her book, so that way you can reach out to her and all the goodness that she brings. So Kate, thanks for stopping by and talking with us. And for everyone listening and watching, thank you for stopping by as well.
Yeah, thank you so much.